You know, you can probably stop blaming the heat for those dropping June tomato flowers. The just feed them more trick is everywhere right now, and honestly, it might be the very reason your flowers keep falling. I kept seeing this advice, so I dug into it, and what I found makes a lot of sense. Here's the thing. The real reason isn't too little food. It's just one quiet thing most of us never really check. Later on, I'm going to show you a cheap kitchen fix that costs maybe $2. And the best part? It's probably sitting in your kitchen trash right now. I'll be straight with you. I'm not a master farmer. I'm just someone who digs through all these viral garden tips and keeps what actually holds up. So, we're going to demystify this. First, we'll look at why those June flowers are really dropping. Then, the simple diet swap your plant is quietly asking for. And finally, a 4-week feeding plan you can start this weekend. No fancy tools, no guesswork, just a calm, simple fix. So here's the thing nobody really mentions in those feeding videos. Sometime around June, a tomato plant just flips a switch. It stops trying to get bigger, and it starts trying to make fruit. And that rich, leafy diet that helped it so much back in May, it can actually start working against it now. So when those flowers fall, it usually isn't bad luck. And it isn't some secret missing nutrient you've never heard of. It usually comes down to 3 very ordinary things. And the first one is a mistake almost everyone makes. Assuming more fertilizer always equals more fruit. In June, it can be the exact opposite. This is where your healthy-looking tomato plants start lying to you. We call it the nitrogen trap. I mean, it makes sense, right? You see a tired-looking plant, you reach for the fertilizer. But the problem is, most of those are loaded with nitrogen. And nitrogen mainly just pushes green leaves. I was reading some notes from Texas A&M and UC Davis, and they actually suggest easing off the nitrogen once flowering begins. Otherwise, your plant looks lush and healthy on the outside, while the flowers quietly go hungry. Lush on the outside, starving on the inside. Someone in the community put it perfectly. They had 7-foot vines, deep green, and barely a tomato in sight. That's the painful part. Your plant can look healthier than ever, while quietly preparing to give you absolutely nothing. Now, you might be thinking, does that mean my plant doesn't need nitrogen at all? Not quite. Don't overthink it. It still wants a little bit, just not a massive push right now. Your potting mix and compost are already releasing a slow, steady trickle on their own. So in June, we are not starving the plant. We're just changing the menu for a few weeks. So, if it's not a lack of food, what is it? That brings us to reason number 2, the heat. And you've probably felt this one yourself recently. You see, tomato pollen kind of does its best work right between 21 and 29 degrees Celsius. When the days push hotter and the nights stay warm, that pollen turns sticky and the flower never gets fertilized. So the plant just reads that as a dead end, and it lets the flower go to save energy. Nothing you did wrong. No bad gardening. Just biology doing the math. And then there's reason number 3. This is that quiet one I promised you back at the start. 2 minerals, calcium and boron, build the tiny seam where the flower joins the stem. Think of it this way. Picture calcium as the cement in that little joint, and boron is like the thin wire holding the cement in place. When either one runs short, that seam just crumbles, and the flower drops. And this isn't some fringe internet idea. I was looking at a recent study, and it suggested a light calcium spray could actually cut early flower drop by up to 30%. Add a little boron, and it improves the fruit set on top of that. Now, don't panic if that sounds like a lot of science, because the fix is the easy part. Like I said before, no lab gear, no chemistry degree. Honestly, if you can boil an egg and fill a spray bottle, you can handle this. So let's get into what your plant is actually asking for right now. And spoiler alert, it's probably not what those viral videos told you to buy. So here's the big swap, and honestly, it's refreshingly boring. Instead of feeding for more growth, you're going to feed for fruit. That means easing off the high nitrogen stuff and leaning on two cheap helpers your plant is quietly asking for: calcium and boron. This is the part those everyday garden videos almost always seem to skip. And we need to talk about money for a second, because this really surprised me. A fancy commercial bloom booster can run you $50 a season. This little calcium and boron fix, it costs under $2. And most of it just comes from eggshells you're already throwing in the trash. Now, here's why this works when piling on more fertilizer doesn't. You see, calcium just doesn't travel very well inside a stressed plant, especially in the summer heat. So a gentle spray puts it exactly where the flower needs it, instead of just hoping the roots manage to send it all the way up the vine. And the boron just rides along and helps the pollen actually do its job. Now, you've probably seen that viral apple cider vinegar trick going around. And I have to be honest with you. Pouring raw vinegar anywhere near your roots is just a bad idea. It can really hurt the plant. The calmer, much safer way is to let the vinegar react with the eggshells first. That neutralizes the acid. Then you dilute it heavily, roughly 1 part to 1,000, before you ever spray. Used that way, the acid is essentially gone. You're just left with the pure calcium. Slow and gentle beats strong every single time here. Someone in Ohio told me they tried this exact spray on just one plant, and they left the rest alone. A few weeks later, that one plant was holding firm, while all the others kept dropping flowers. Even her neighbor leaned over the fence to ask what she was doing differently. And you know, that's exactly the kind of quiet result we're after. So, remember that $2 kitchen fix I promised? Here it is. I've broken it down into a simple week-by-week plan. And one of these 4 weeks is the step most people completely skip, the one that quietly decides whether all of this actually holds. Before we get into the details, here's the whole plan in 4 lines, just so you have the map before we zoom in. Week 1, change the diet. Week 2, rescue the flowers. Week 3, do nothing fancy, just water correctly. Week 4, repeat the rescue spray. That's the entire roadmap. Now let's fill in each week. First things first, you're going to make 2 really cheap mixes. For the calcium, bake about a dozen rinsed eggshells for half an hour so they crush easily. Then, soak them in apple cider vinegar, about 1 shell's worth to 10 parts vinegar, and just let it sit for a week until it stops fizzing. Then there's the boron, and honestly, this is where less is truly more. Plain household borax works fine. Quick safety note though, keep the raw powder far away from curious dogs and grandkids. And once you mist your plants, keep pets out of that bed until the leaves fully dry. The safe dose is tiny, about half a teaspoon in a gallon of water. I'll be direct with you here. Boron has a very narrow safe range, so measure it. Don't eyeball it. Treat this like seasoning, not soup. Week 1 is the diet change. Stop the high nitrogen feed. Work 1 or 2 tablespoons of bone meal into the top 1 or 2 inches of soil for some slow, gentle phosphorus, and then water it in. And a quick tip about that bone meal: don't just scatter it on top of the mulch where it sits and does nothing. Pull the mulch back, mix it lightly into the soil, and then cover it again. That also keeps it out of reach of dogs who love to dig that stuff up. Week 2 is the rescue spray. Take a teaspoon of your eggshell calcium, plus that half teaspoon of borax in a gallon of water, and mist it lightly over the leaves and flower clusters in the early morning. Week 3 is that step most people skip, and it's the quiet hero. Water. No new feed, just deep, steady watering to keep the soil evenly moist. Because uneven watering just undoes everything by triggering more drop. Week 4, you simply repeat that gentle calcium and boron spray. That's it. 4 weeks, and the flowers finally have what they need to hold. And here's the part nobody tells you about timing. You probably won't see results overnight. There's no rush. Give it 2 to 3 weeks, and the change shows up first as flowers that just stop dropping, and then as small green fruit holding firm on the stem. That slow, steady hold is exactly what you're looking for. I'll be straight with you one more time. This is gardening, not a guarantee. Results depend on your weather and your soil, and the evidence for these kitchen versions is partly hands-on rather than lab perfect. But it's cheap, it's gentle, and it lines up perfectly with what the research suggests. Plus, every step easily fits into a busy weekend. So, there you go. That's another trend filtered down to what actually works in a real backyard. June flowers don't drop from bad luck. They drop from too much nitrogen, summer heat, and a little missing calcium and boron. And a $2 kitchen fix quietly puts it right. Try this out, and your neighbors just might be the ones leaning over the fence, asking why your vines are covered in fruit. To make this as easy as possible, I put together a completely free gift, the Ultimate Tomato Growing Success Guide. It includes this exact feeding swap and the 4-week schedule we just covered, plus a printable plant care and harvest log. Just click the first link in the description, print it out, and keep it right by your watering can. And hey, if you'd like me to keep digging through these garden trends for you, subscribing helps more than you know. Happy gardening, and I'll see you in the next one.